Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us here for the first Cuyahoga River South Watershed Advisory Committee meeting for 2022. I want to thank everybody for joining in. My name is Watershed. I'm the Watershed team leader for the Cuyahoga River South area. Donna Friedman has also got some of the communities in the Cuyahoga River South, but I'll be leading the conversation today. For our agenda, we have a very well put together agenda for you for today. We're going to just do some welcoming and introductions and updates with Frank Greenland, the Director of Watershed Programs today. Then we're going to put it over to the swim department to give us updates on the inspection and maintenance. Then Rachel Webb will take over and give us some updates on where we are on master planning. Then George Remus is going to be our feature speaker today and our feature presenter. He's going to talk to us about how we are incorporating the PAR score under the Regional Stormwater Master Plan to help us in our decision making. Then he's also going to give us an update on the strategic support program, and the focus there is how to submit modeling requests. And then Kim Kolish will be presenting for us on the design and construction program, giving us an update on where we are on the design of some projects and the construction of some of them going in at the moment and over the last 6 months, looking back. And then I'll do a look ahead and close us out hopefully by 3:30. So with that, next up is Mr. Frank Greenland. Frank?
Okay, I want to welcome everyone to today's meeting. I want to thank you for attending, and I want to encourage you to ask questions. Typically, we run these meetings and nobody asks any questions. So either the presenters are well understood or it's not interesting, and I want it to be interesting. So please ask questions. Just a couple things on the program itself. We just met with our board finance committee, budget committee today. We're going to adopt our 2022 budget next board meeting, this one coming up. And when I look at the stormwater program and its budget, I see about $46 million of revenue coming in, 75% of that for the district to run its programs. There's, I think the number was 11.6 million per year in that community cost share program, the 25% of the revenue that we hold for local projects in your communities. And every time I'm going to do it, I implore you to utilize that money. There's a lot of good things happening, both at the regional level and the local level. Some of those pots of money are pretty large. There's a pretty hefty, our fund balance is almost $33 million. Some of that's tied up in long-term agreements on bigger projects for the communities, the allocation agreements. The utilization is getting better. COVID hit us a little bit, knocked us back, recovered a bit in 2021. I want to, we'd love to see the numbers in terms of annual utilization continue to grow. Work with your watershed team leaders, to identify and go through the paces to get approved projects going. A lot of communities do use this very well, and I implore everybody to do so. On a side note, basically, you're going to hear about master planning to get all of the problem areas on the regional level up to, I think it's 100-year level of service, which is going to be hard in some areas, $1.36 billion. So that's a lot of cash, and that's the regional projects. There's a significant sum at the local level, and each and every community I know has your own specific areas of need. So this community cost share is a good thing for the local communities. On the bigger picture of funding, we are looking very hard at the new infrastructure bill, both on the wastewater side and stormwater, trying to understand the ground rules. Ohio EPA will deal with the wastewater side. through their loan program. So all of the guidance and ground rules are being worked on now, and we're talking to Ohio EPA, US EPA, and others to make sure that this program, the utilization of the new infrastructure dollars, is as seamless and easy as possible. We really want to get some dollars into our member community. Same thing on the stormwater side. A lot of existing pots of money for different things, stormwater related, dam removals, dam reconstruction, watershed management, wetlands creation, different things, FEMA, the Army Corps, others. There are pots of money, and this infrastructure bill added to those pots of money. So we're scouring for utilization by us on regional projects, but we're also trying to identify those pots of money where it could help the community as well. So I urge you to take a hard look at the new infrastructure bill, and if there's things, particularly FEMA and buyouts in some areas, it could be very attractive to help you remove structures from harm's way. But we will continue to try and find avenues we might take, or our local communities might be able to take, to access that new money. And that's all I've got, but thank you for attending, and please ask questions along the way. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Frank. Yeah, and as Frank mentioned, the slide that's up here is the community cost share funds. We have spent almost $33 million in the program. There's $21 million and some change in the bank that's sitting there ready to use. So please connect with your Watershed team leader. We are here to help you come up with projects or show you what we have found to maybe be priorities to consider to use the money. We can also tell you how other communities have been spending their money, to help you with some ideas. Next. I just want to remind everybody about the Member Community Infrastructure Program. Our 2023 funding level has been approved for $15 million. On April 7th, we will be sending out the anticipated date for the request for proposals to come out to you. Linda Mayer will mail those out to you and your community partners. Then we would really ask you to look at between May 2nd and May 6th, we will be scheduling pre-proposal meetings with the team here at the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. We really want you to bring your ideas or your projects to us so we can talk through it and help you to submit the best possible projects to the district on May 31st of this year. Then in June and July, the district staff will go through the proposal review process, and then we will get back to everybody after the board meeting in September. We will be announcing the projects that were selected for 2023 funding, so we can work on the agreements and get the agreements signed by December 31st, 2022. Next. Just an update on the local sewer system evaluation study that was done. Most of these have been completed now. The one for the Cuyahoga South that's of note is the Southwest Interceptor study. All those reports have been done. We have a handful of them to go still out to the communities, but for the most part, that one is completed. The Cuyahoga Valley Interceptor, those reports are also complete and final. Bill will be sending out those final reports to the communities in the next week or two. Some of you have already received those. We do ask that you look at those because I will be scheduling meetings with all the communities that falls within the Cuyahoga Valley Interceptor, me and Donna. And we will be scheduling meetings with you just to make sure that we circle the wagons one last time to make sure that you understand the reports and the content of those reports. Thank you. Next. Then just want to touch base on the report of flood tool. This tool has been out for about a year now. We have over 300 entries from the communities on reported floods. we do ask that every time that you get a report at your service department or your engineering department or the mayor's desk, council persons, if they get any reports of basement flooding, street flooding, yards flooding, if they can just put that information into the report, the flood tool. Last year, we did go over this tool. If you need to learn or know more about it, please call your watershed team leader. We're happy to go through it with you again. We really want you to enter the data in this tool for a couple of reasons. So we can prioritize, so we can make sure that the areas that have reported flooding lines up with the problem areas. So we can create heat maps to maybe help us in our prioritization of projects. And this is sanitary and stormwater side. And then, so those are the main reasons. So we can help prioritize projects. We also did, just want to let you all know, we did do a presentation to the Cleveland Metro Parks Watershed Volunteer Program folks, the citizen scientists there. And I ran through the tool with them so that as they are out in the community, they can also maybe enter some of the things that they see. This is not something that we are advertising for residents and customers to use. We want to do some quality control. So we are asking for communities to enter the data, and then folks like the volunteers with the Cleveland Metro Parks. I will drop a link to this tool. This is a web tool, so I will drop a link to the tool in the chat in a little bit. And then so if you want to know where this is, you can just find it right here. Next. Next up, this is just a map for your watershed team leaders. Donna Friedman as the light blue areas. I have the in-between blue areas on the outer rims of the service area. And then Jeff Jowett has Cleveland and the East Side communities. And we ask that you call us and with any questions or issues you might have regarding sanitary or stormwater issues that we can help with. Next. And with that, happy Women's Day, International Women's Day to all the ladies out there. Any questions? If you have any questions today, please put them into the chat. Keith McClintock, manager for Stormwater Program, will be monitoring the chat for us, and he will let the presenters know if there's any questions. So with that, I'm going to.
Hey, Myron, one thing I just wanted to add. Back to community cost share.
Yeah.
There's two other uses of community cost share that I think would be, I want all the communities to look hard at this. One is, and we've had a lot of good partnerships with certain communities where the district is doing a regional project, flooding, erosion, whatever, to extend that district project to the local level. So that while we're out constructing regional facilities, we've got that economy of scale and could do the local projects, the local communities typically paying out of their cost share fund. I think that's a great way to execute work and solve, multiple problems. So I would implore people to look into that and have discussions with your team leader about that potential. The second thing, and George, I don't know if he's going to talk about exactly where we're at with the model, but all the models from the master plans are ours. And we're going to keep them updated. And we have external resources to keep those models up to date. We can also take those models and extend them and refine them and get finer grids to use on investigating local problems and potential local solutions. And depending on how that costs out, sometimes community cost share would be very helpful to allow us to fund those projects. And that's really going to work through George Remus. But I do think that we have a very powerful regional tool, modeling tool, that could be very helpful at the local level so that we can all understand why things are happening and what the best solutions are. And we want to work with you on that as well. So that's it. That's all I've got. Thanks.
Thank you, Frank. Yeah, George will have a segment regarding the modeling, and yes, that will be a great place for community cost share if you want to investigate more about how the local system and the regional system is interacting. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Kelsey. She's our stormwater maintenance inspector 2 at the stormwater inspection and maintenance program. Kelsey, it's all yours.
Thank you, Myring. As Myring just said, my name is Kelsey Amadon, and I am a stormwater inspector here at the sewer district. So today, just going to be walking through our typical inspection and maintenance updates. So any updates we've had since the last WAC meeting. And then I'd like to also introduce our project monitoring plans. So this is our typical overview map of our inspections that we've completed since October of 2021. So we have completed a total of 67 inspections in the Cuyahoga River South. 4 of those have been customer requests, 22 inspections for debris at crossings, 37 preventative inspections, which are based on our previous structural conditions that we assign. And then 4 of them have been other responsible party inspections, which is where we take from entities such as ODOT or the county, we take their inspections and we assign our condition scores based off their inspections. So we're going to give a couple examples of inspections that we've done. So these are photos from a customer case. It was along Sagamore Creek in Walton Hills. So SWIM recently completed a small stream bank stabilization project at the crossing outlet in 2020. So you can see that kind of in that top left photo that we have. So the owner of this home called us because they had noticed some new erosion just downstream of that project. So we wanted to make sure that our project wasn't causing any issues. So we looked, there is some recent erosion in that that top right photo. You can see a little bit of recent slumping that had occurred, but it's far enough downstream from our project that we don't think that it kind of is related to this. But the bank was actually pretty stable. Definitely some slumping happening, but it's very well vegetated. There are gabion baskets on the opposite bank, but they're in pretty good condition. And then just as you go downstream of this area, it becomes pretty stable with lots of visible shale. So it seems to be a pretty isolated area. So we're going to continue to monitor this area just to see how the erosion continues. And then assess from there. It's also part of a greater project area for stream bank stabilization, pending our internal prioritization and vetting process. So another, whoop, a little too fat, there we go. All right, so this is another customer case for erosion, this time in Sagamore Hills Township. So the stream banks on River Right and River Left are both eroding. They're kind of near this pedestrian footbridge. And if you look on the map on the left, it's just upstream of a culverted stream. So this customer called because they're concerned about the erosion coming near their deck and their home. So we went out and looked at it, took some measurements. So we noticed that there is a small sediment bar in that top left photo. You can see there's a little bit sediment bar kind of in the center, and that's pushing the flows towards that left bank and a little bit closer to their structures. It's not necessarily affecting those structures at this time. So we are going to keep monitoring it to see how it continues and if maybe it's kind of self-stabilized a little bit. We also nominated it for a small scale project to stabilize this and to remove that sediment bar to kind of remove some of the pressure off that left bank. This asset is also part of a much larger project area that's still kind of pending the internal prioritization, but we're going to keep monitoring it and potentially do a small scale project at this site. Moving on to maintenance, this photo is actually in that culvert that was just downstream of that last inspection. So we removed a couple cubic yards just to keep the culvert clear. This is at a catch basin, so you're kind of looking down into the culvert. So the overview map of our maintenance we've completed since October. So we've completed 7 total projects in the south, removing a total of 27 cubic yards of debris. And then we also did a vegetation management maintenance, which just involved removing some tall grasses at the end of the growing season at a previous stabilization project. A couple examples of the maintenance. So in December, our maintenance crew was out removing debris at the culvert under Derbyshire Drive, and they noticed that the flow was extremely low compared to normal. So we went out just to figure out what was happening out there. And we discovered a small blockage upstream of the culvert. So the blockage wasn't huge. However, this is a pretty flood-prone area. So we went ahead and removed that debris, especially because it's upstream of a culvert, and we'd rather, we don't want it moving downstream into the culvert and where it's going to be harder to remove. So this was just kind of a preventative action to make sure that the streams are free and clear and conveying and ready for the storm events that'll probably coming this spring. And there is a large project area for this area. It's currently in design. You're good. Last, we finished up a small scale project in Valley View. This is under Morningside Drive. In January of 2020, an inspection revealed in the top left, you can see this kind of extreme erosion around the river left head wall. So we noticed that there was a lot of sedimentation at this inlet. So if you look at the center photos, the top one is before and the bottom one is after we did a sediment removal in 2020. And then after that was completed, we then went forward with a small scale project, which is the after photos are on the right side of the screen. So this project was completed in November of 2021. We stabilized 61 linear feet and aligned the flow path so that it's no longer hitting that river left wing wall. And they also installed a concrete block vein arm, which you can see, it got really dark, in the upper right photo. And so that was to kind of reinforce that bank as well as to discourage sedimentation at the inlet to hopefully keep that from eroding as it has in the past. So with those projects, we have started establishing project monitoring plans. So these were developed for 34 project sites, which includes 13 small scales and 21 design and construction sites thus far. As we continue to do projects, we will create more of these. So these are kind of just a list of standard work instructions that are specific to each site. So they detail what we need to monitor and the components of the project. So these are not an agency requirement, but kind of a standard operating procedure that we created just so that we can help protect our investment. So we'll look at things like the plantings, how the plants are doing, whether they're healthy, if there's invasive species, as well as it'll kind of detail what structures we need to look at. So we monitor these sites twice a year for years 1 through 3, and then annually for years 4 and 5. And then after that 5th year, we determine based on how the site is doing and what it looks like, how often we need to monitor from then on. So this is our Bear Creek stream bank stabilization site in North Randall. So this was completed in 2020. There'd been some erosion, especially around a local outfall, kind of at this bend. So when we went out, which is the photo on the left, shortly after it had been completed, we noticed that some of the new vegetation had been deer browsed. So we sent out our swim internal maintenance crew to put tree cages and to better protect that vegetation, as you can see on the photo on the right. Similarly, this is our Indian Creek project in Macedonia. So this project was completed in 2018. So as you can see on the left, multiple tree cages, they were full of debris from when the stream got elevated and was flowing through there. And then some of the stakes had gotten knocked over and were no longer supporting the vegetation. So we sent out our internal maintenance crew. They cleaned and repaired these cages. And you can see on the right that those trees are now properly protected and able to keep growing. So with all of those sites, I kind of mentioned it. Whenever we need maintenance at that, we do have this internal landscape maintenance crew that provides these maintenance services such as mulching, planting, replacing trees that have died, adding tree protection, trimming trees. We do a little bit of invasive species management. So this is kind of after the 1-year warranty of a project. If it's within that 1 year, the contractor will perform the maintenance. But after that, we have this internal maintenance crew that will go out and do the maintenance, and then they can protect our investment better. So with that, I will leave you with this beautiful photo of Sagamore Creek in Walton Hills with this nice shale banks that doesn't have many issues with it. So if there are any questions, I'll take those. And if not, I'll forward it on to project manager Rachel Webb.
No questions?
I don't think so.
We do
I thought I
have one question, Rachel. It might go back
Okay.
to Myring. It was a throwback to the initial conversation about the raft tool. You saw that question come in, Myring?
Yeah, Claire, you can, if you go to the link, you'll see there's different options there. So parking lots and things like that, yeah, you can put those in there. So if you don't have an address for the structure that's flooding, so, you know, if it's a parking lot or a restroom or a road, we definitely want to know about that. If it's, you know, a part of the natural area flooding, that's no, I mean, it's not important, but that's not something for the flood tool to use. So if you have a parking lot or a road or an infrastructure for Cleveland Metro Parks that's flooding, just put in, if you don't have an address, the coordinates. You can put the coordinates in there. That will populate on the map for us, a point, and then just make a description. And there is also a way for you to upload photos. Photos do help a lot, because when we do the modeling, we can then see what the water level was in that area for the different storm events. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. So I think, John, that was the only question.
We have one more from Jeff. Jeff, yes, all the Watershed Advisory Committee meetings are on our website. And if there's specific slides that you would like, just email me and then I can email you those specific slides after the meeting. But all the Watershed Advisory Committee meetings are archived on our website.
Okay, great. We're going to get into master planning. So I'm going to do part of what I'm doing today is a little setup for the feature. George, he's going to come after me, but so I'm going to give a little bit of a refresher. Stormwater master plans. This Cuyahoga River South was completed going back to 2018 and 19, early 19. So time flies. And just a quick reminder on what we did, right? This was a technical evaluation to provide us with planning level recommendations. I'm obviously probably very much oversimplifying what we did, but the intent was to identify problem areas that were focused on flooding and erosion and those impacts of both of those to buildings, roads, crossings, and utilities, so transportation assets and utilities. And then we did an analysis, alternatives analysis to fix the problem, right? And that's in quotations, right? Because fixing is very relative in a lot of situations, but looking to stabilize erosion areas and to reduce flooding impacts up to a 100-year storm. And those were the types of recommendations that came out of the Cuyahoga River South Master Plan and then the subsequent 3-4 that we have done. The costs associated with those problem areas, upwards of $195,000 for the Cuyahoga River South, master plans, and those problem areas are the red boxes. So hopefully you remember this from presentations past, but just a refresher kind of on what we did and how we got to the problem areas that we have with this planning process. So thinking about just not the South, but we have master plans completed and problem areas identified for 2 other of our identified watersheds, the Cuyahoga River North and the Rocky River, which you see there. So 70 problem areas from the North, 152 from the Rocky River. I will say in the Rocky River, it's not that they have double the amount of problems. It's a different way that problem areas were identified there. So they have some smaller problem areas, so they have more of them, but some in in the south and the north, we have some larger problem areas, so less of them. So if you want to think about it that way, the Chagrin Lake Erie, which is what we lovingly call the chalet, but that's the Chagrin Lake Erie tributaries on the east side. We should have the problem areas projects by sometime in the middle of this year. And then all of those are going to get nominated along with the ones that are currently have been nominated for all three of the master plan areas into the stormwater construction plan. So we've mentioned this before. All of these problem areas are in the stormwater construction plan. However, they're not all scheduled, right? We have a construction plan scheduled only out 1 year, 2 years, and looking to do a little bit further than that, but really just looking at the next couple of years. So while they're all scored, they're not necessarily all scheduled and planned out. With that being said, we do review problem areas, those nominations, during our annual stormwater construction plan review. And we update the scoring. It's a benefit scoring, and then George is going to talk a little bit about the PAR scoring that goes with that, which is not golf. So sorry to disappoint you if you thought we were going to get into some golf here. But we do look at that scoring that we did for those nominations, and we change them, based on the changing situation that is in reality on the ground, from erosion or flooding and new information that comes in. So not to hit it home again, but I will, that raft tool is a very important tool for us because it does verify flooding. We have part of the master planning was building these stormwater master plan models to show us where we get flooding. We want to know, are we right? Is the model right? Does it need to be looked at further? If it's predicting accurately, then we love to see, I don't want to say love to see, right? We don't want to see anybody flood, but we want to see what's happening on the ground. And that helps with the scoring and the nomination to show all of that information. So I can't emphasize that raft tool enough. If you're looking at this map and the previous maps from the south, and you're kind of, I don't remember where my problem areas are. It's been a while since I've thought about them. We did have the community reports that we provided in 2019 to the communities for the Cuyahoga River South. If you can't find it, can't put your hands on it, want to review it, get in touch with Myra and Donna. They can provide you another copy. Or if you find it and you have it and you look it over and you have some questions, there is no statute of limitations on talking about these problem areas and getting more details or seeing where they are. Are you providing us with information on it? Because the more information we have on what's happening in these problem areas, the better we can do for implementation of a project. So moving from planning to action, here's a snapshot, right, of some of the activities that are occurring in the South based on the Stormwater Master Plan. This is just looking at some of the stuff that's moved into the design and construction stage. For more information, Kim is probably going to give you a quick snapshot on some of these, but you can see we're kind of in and around the service area and the Chippewa and the Brandywine, also on the main stem of the Cuyahoga River. So we are using these master plans. I guess everybody always sometimes thinks that plans are put on a shelf and never used, and these master plans are actively used daily for me in terms of what I access and questions that we have on them, and looking at the stormwater construction plan, etc. So these are used plans, which is why it's so important to have that additional information that you can provide on what's happening in the problem areas. So with that, if there's any questions, I will say, just as a carry on, George is going to follow me, and he's going to he's the feature going to be talking about the PAR score, which I said is not related to golf. He's going to give you a lot more information on it, but it does build on the master plans and the nomination and the scoring that we have been doing. So just remember some of that. If you could think about it, if you've been paying attention, hopefully some key points to keep in mind as you're listening to his presentation.
Okay, so, but like the golf community has told us, PAR score above 0 is what you're trying to avoid. So this figure here, this is one of those investments that Frank mentioned about stormwater models and how we are investing in creating 2D surfaces to help identify where some of the flooding takes place, both in sometimes the local area as well as the regional area. And the blue shaded is kind of an example of where we actually think some flooding may be taking place along Snow Road and Chevy Boulevard. So let's move on. Thank you. All right, so PAR, it stands for Probable Annual Risk, and how we're applying that to our program, both to help prioritize projects, but as well as to track risk across the service area. So quick overview, our regional stormwater system, we've kind of talked about that in the past. And right now we're around 500 miles of regional stormwater system. And we have that broken down into about 1,053 culverts and bridges, which we refer to as crossings, about 360 miles of rivers and streams, about 135 miles of culverted streams, 97 various basins or regulated ODNR dams that we refer to as basins, and then about 14 isolated low head dams that we call major structures, and of course that all feeds into one Great Lake. So we have all of our stormwater related assets following this asset hierarchy. So if we start at the watershed level, which is a grouping assets, and then breaks down into the sub-watershed level, which eventually breaks down to a sub-watershed community level. Then we get into the physical assets. You've heard a lot about our local and regional before, so we won't have to hash that out here. You kind of see our drainage area plus or minus 300 acre rule. And under there for the physical assets, where we might have the crossings or culverted streams, for example, on the bottom left, but we might consider a child asset would be a further breakdown of that crossing, whether it's at the inlet, the barrel, or the outlet. And then a lot of the things that we've been talking about, those BTUs, building transportation utility assets, those are those child non-stormwater assets. Next. And that's exactly where they go. And so those are the assets that we're really going to be talking a little about here in terms of assigning risk. Next. So this is a quick breakdown of our regional system for those who haven't seen it before like this, where we have those different asset class types broken down. This is along Tinker's Creek, where we have the streams, culverted streams, and crossings. Next. And then we factor into our stormwater models with the inundation areas. That's kind of the shaded purples. Then we flag those BTUs, building transportation utilities, where the pink polygons indicate the different transportation assets. The black polygons are buildings, and then a couple of red diamonds are utilities. So each of those we're really looking at and assigning different types of risk to, and that's kind of what we're going to get into here in a little bit. So with that breakdown, we do assign different condition ratings for each of those assets, whether it's sediment debris accumulation or structural integrity. Those are the field-based condition ratings that we assign. 1 being excellent condition rating, 5 being failure. And then we also then with a model-based approach use the hydraulic performance condition rating. So finding out if it's flooding. And that sediment debris accumulation, structural integrity, that's assigned by our SWIM group that you just heard from Kelsey. Next. So for each of those condition ratings, since we have a criticality value assigned to each of those assets, we come up with that business risk or exposure score by simply multiplying that condition times criticality. And then many of our activities are influenced by those scores. Next. And then what we're going to focus on when we talk about this probable annual risk is really related to those field-based structural risks or those model-based hydraulic performance risks. Next. So that condition criticality piece that I was talking about with the BRE scores, this is our tiering system. You kind of have condition ratings 1 through 5 on the vertical axis, and on the horizontal axis, it's a 3 through 9. We get those values by assigning 3 subcategories. What is the public safety / impact? What is the environmental impact? And then what is the fiscal impact? Each of those get a 1 through 3. And collectively, we get a 3 through 9. And that BRE score, you kind of see our tier system. And when we have a BRE score of 20 and above, We consider that an unacceptable risk in our program. And so you kind of see the different tiers, and we're going to get into then what is that risk as we introduce this PAR score. Next. So as Rachel mentioned, we have a lot of projects that have been nominated. And my number is a little different than what you saw from the others, as the others had focused more on just the master planning projects. Mine really incorporates not only the master planning, but also projects that we have found in the field through our swim group and other one-offs that have been added outside of the master plans. And with that total cost, with the roughly $1.5 billion overall for all those projects, and looking at what was driving those projects, many of them were split between that structural and those flooding risks. We realized there was a prioritization process that we needed to develop to help figure out how to prioritize these projects. Next. So we started with this system that you see here, and we use this for every project that gets nominated. So those 400 plus projects all get the scoring breakdown. It's total of 145 point system. You can see each of these individual categories at the top and what their points are assigned. We go through every single one of these, answer the questions, and come up with a different point system. The problem is when we look at what is the benefit for some of these problems, particularly when we have large scale problems, whether they're structural or flooding based, we realized with so many projects and with so many different complexities that this 40 points assigned to the benefits of reducing flood and structural risk started clumping a lot of projects, and wasn't quite sure if this was the best way that we wanted to apply it. So we had to take a step back. Next slide. So we had to ask ourselves, what is it that we thought made the most sense to prioritize our projects? And you kind of see these different quadrants. And the upper right one is the one that we want to give the higher priority to. So if we had a lot of these BTUs at risk or RSS assets, and they're receiving a current low level of service, meaning lots of things are flooding, say at the 2-year storm, we wanted to give those higher priority than the smaller, fewer assets at risk with a higher level of service. And with that in mind, we were trying to think through what is the best way to do that. And that's where we introduced the concept of PAR. So what is PAR? It stands for, once again, probable annual risk to any of these assets or problem areas, where that score that we defined was above that acceptable level of risk, that 20 and above. Next. So just like the Gulf community has educated the world, our concept is for the PAR to be equal to 0. And we calculate it by comparing all the structural and calculating all the structural and hydraulic risks within each of those respective problem areas and recommended alternatives. And so the score that we are coming up with is by looking at that overall probable annual risk of what's been reduced by what exists today, what is remaining after the project is completed, and then that difference is what we consider as that reduced PAR. Next. So how do we calculate it? This is one of those mathy slides here, but it's not too, hopefully not too complicated, and you can follow along, is where we take our original risk score, so that BRE score that's between 3 and 45. And since our unacceptable risk is 20, we subtract any scores that are above 20 by 19 to get what is that unacceptable risk. And then we sum those values by its probability of occurrence, all that structural and hydraulic risk. Next. So for the structural risk, it essentially is based upon an existing field-based assessment. So the probability of that risk actually occurring is a 1, because that is current conditions. The challenge of probability when we apply stormwater models is where this becomes more important. Next. So when we look at these design storms with our swim models or our other stormwater models, the probability of each of those storms is where this probability comes into play. So for any given year, the probability of a 1-year storm is, in fact, should happen at least once. And so we have that probability of 1. Whereas a 10-year storm has a 10% chance in any given year. So we have that probability as 0.1, and then the 100 years, a 1% chance, so it's a 0.01. So by taking that risk score and applying that probability to any given asset, We total up that total score, and that ultimately becomes the probable annual risk for either an asset or the problem area as a whole. And so I'm going to go through an example here next. So this example is along Brandywine Creek, and this is a problem area that we've gone ahead and scored. And so those gray polygons are building assets within our flood inundation area. And then the gray linear assets are transportation assets that are also within an inundation area. If you go to the next slide, each of those building and transportation assets, there weren't any structural risks at this time. So you can kind of see the asset IDs on the y-axis, and the horizontal axis are assets to be mindful of from a risk perspective. So in this 10-year storm, there were 2 transportation assets that had exceeded that threshold of 20 and above. And then you can see the other scores for the 25, 50, and 100. And those are the only ones that are listed here. So what we do is take that BRE score, next, subtract out that total points of 19 to get what is then considered the unacceptable risk. And that's what you see in the red parentheses. So 20 minus 19, for example, there's a risk of 1. You can see the other scores. Next. And then we multiply that number by the probability of those particular storm events. So the 10-year storm, once again, you would apply that risk by a 0.1 to give you the total par score of 0.1 for one particular calc. And you can see how that was applied across all those values. Next. And then in order to calculate the total probable annual risk for this problem area, you just sum up all those values. You can see the value in the bottom right for this problem area is 2.49. Now be mindful of that number is roughly 40 points. If you remember, we assigned 40 points for reducing structural and hydraulic risk along the system. So this 2.49 doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. Why do you need to get into this level of par? And that's where the next slide comes in. So in this example, this is a different problem area, and the actual par score for this is significantly higher. So over 797 points of par or probable annual risk. And you can kind of see why. The number of inundated buildings ranges from 9 to 136. You can see that on the table, 9 at the 1 year and 136 at the 100 year. And there is a structural risk here. And by doing that and summing up all those par scores, you can see it's a much higher score than that assigned 40 points that we had originally. And so by adding that to our original benefits-based scoring system, the total score is much higher. And all of a sudden, this becomes a much higher priority problem area compared to what it was before. Now, if you look at that total project cost of $33 million on the bottom right, that kind of gives you a sense of this is not a type of problem that we can just solve on its own in a single project. And that's where the next challenge comes in next. So when we apply these par scores, this hydraulic risk and this structural probable annual risk, and assign that to the scores that we used before, you can kind of see what the total project is highlighted in green on the right, and then ultimately what its rank is. And by applying this kind of methodology for prioritizing projects, seem to make a lot of these big problems jump to the top of the list overall. And this seemed to be a better approach, at least identifying what are the biggest problems in our service area, not necessarily the first projects that we are going to address under our program. Next. So when you organize and sort all of these projects, you can kind of see, once again, the par score. This is on the y-axis. Horizontally, all of those projects, those 400 plus projects, have been sorted from highest to lowest par score. And then the breakdown of what percent of those scores are at or below a certain point system. You can see to the right how high the project is. We have one problem area with over 879 points of probable annual risk. And then there's some that only had 1 point. Next. So you can go back to the original 40 points that we assigned to that for those problem areas for the risk reduction. And by applying this PAR methodology, you can see roughly 60% of the problems that we have actually seem to fall within that system, but there's an additional 40% by applying this logic helps elevate just how big of a problem there really is there. And at this time, back on our original fall numbers, the total probable annual risk, or PAR score, was a little over 12,000 points. And then you can see that in the upper left corner. And we're going to use that from a tracking perspective. Next. So now that we've applied this, there's a lot of different benefits by using this. We can summarize total risks by an asset, whether it's a building or a road or a crossing or a total problem area, like we showed in a couple of those examples. Next. And so now we can also assess what risk remains once a project is completed. We kind of use that example, right? If there's problems that are at the 100-year in our project, can resolve those up to the 10-year, that remaining risk still exists. And that's something we can still track. Next. And so the question then became whether or not this kind of approach can help us with phasing a complicated or expensive project. And so I have an example for that next. You can hit it one more time. Okay, so here's an example. This is one of those bigger problem areas, and this is located in Big Creek. And this area, the total PAR score is high, lots of flooding. It starts flooding at the 1-year storm. There's some structural issues with basins and culverted streams. And its probable annual risk / PAR score is 611 points, a big problem. Next. And so when we looked at this under the master plan, there was a whole range of projects and solutions to come up with, and you can kind of see it on the right with all the different text of explaining certain solutions to help implement to reduce that overall risk. But the total project cost was a large number. It was nearly $41 million. And so how do we break this up into smaller packages for implementation? And so that's where this PAR score approach came into, how we come up with the sequence for these projects. Next. So what we did was take a look at all those recommended improvements, grouped them into these various problem packages or project packages. Next. And then we played with the different sequencing order of those project packages. You can see those on the right, the different table. It shows each of those respective projects with different orders. And we looked at their PAR scores. On the right, if you care to look at how it was assessed, but the graphic, I think, on the left helps explain it even better. And so you can see the same projects with the different sequencing. Sequence 1 is in the red, sequence 2 is the green dash, sequence 3 was the orange dash, and it shows how the PAR score was reduced after implementing each of the respective projects, realizing the ultimate PAR reduction would be at the end. And by looking at these 3 different types of sequences, we all agreed that sequence 1 was the best approach because it had the biggest reduced risk by introducing the first initial set of sequences before it got to the end result. And everyone had agreed collectively that that was the right approach. So with that in mind, it seemed like the PAR approach seemed to help us not only figure out what kind of risk we had at a project area, but now we can also look at it from how does the sequence of projects help reduce the risk and at what cost. Next. And this is just a quick summary of how that PAR score was reduced by looking at the different problems. And as I noted before, not all projects reduce all the PAR scores. So this shows you what remains for this sequence of projects. Next. So with all that in mind, what are some other reasons to use this PAR? Next. So now we can better understand not only what is the risk that exists, but the different types of risks that we have, whether it's structural or hydraulic, or even by different design, storm, or by project sequence. Next. We can group those assets. So if you remember how we have watersheds, community, even asset class type, we can now look at these collectively as a whole to better understand if there's certain trends. Next. And we can track this at the programmatic level. We want to use this to say, okay, what is the current risk that we're aware of across the service area? And as we implement these projects, how is that risk being reduced? We can use these numbers to help to follow this along as we introduce projects and implement them and reduce that. Next. And that's one of the reasons why we also want to use it, is help to demonstrate some of its success. Just saying that certain problems have gone away is always good, but can we help quantify it and track it moving forward? Next. So here's a quick overview of the PAR score by the different master plans that it completed. And, you know, as Rachel had mentioned before, the Chagrin Lake Erie Trib is almost done, and we'll be able to present this, I think, at the next WAC meeting. But here you can see that from a PAR score perspective, the Cuyahoga River North has significantly more PAR risk compared to the South and the Rocky. When you take a little more breakdown of what that it consists of, you can see while the structural risk across the three different master plans were not too different from one another, it was really the hydraulic score that was significantly higher in the North. Next. When you break that down even further by the different design storms, you can see from the North being in the blue, just how many more building and transportation assets were flooded compared to the other two areas. Next. And this is just a reminder back from the last presentation that I gave with the WAC about how going back to how some of our neighborhoods were developed early on prior to all these different stormwater control measures and floodplain regulations. This shows the Ohio population compared to what those typical stormwater control measure and floodplain regulations that we take for granted now were really implemented after most of our population was, the infrastructure for that population was built. So many of our areas are struggling to deal with some of these new challenges. And so this is just one of the reasons why we noticed as a trend why the North has so many flooding problem areas. Next. So we also then, as I spent a lot of time talking about the hydraulic, because I think it's the most challenging one to grasp, but we are applying it at the structural level. This is something you've seen in the past with our swim group, looking at all the different stormwater assets and how we've assigned the structural PAR to it as well. And this gives you a quick summary. We have the different condition ratings by the different asset class types. And not only can we say how many assets are structurally failing, but we can also apply that PAR score as well. And so you can see the PAR score by crossings and culvert streams and basins and the total overall. We can use this once again as a baseline as we move forward with implementing projects across the service area. Next. So here's a grouping asset example again at the sub-watershed level, where you can just track the PAR scores by the different sub-watersheds from highest to lowest. Next. And so what are some of our next steps? As we go to implement these projects or we discover new things through our field inspections, these scores will be updated. Next. We'll be able to track this under the program to demonstrate the project benefits. Next. We're going to be looking at how to streamline the stormwater modeling process to calculate this. As you would expect, there's a lot of post-processing. So the quicker that we can get to that end result, the better. We are exploring tracking this at the local level. I think Frank mentioned how we're interested in extending these models as appropriate into the local system and applying that same logic that we just did at the regional level of buildings and roads that flood. Next. And so on top of that, we want to look at, is there some resiliency in the service area as we look at whether it's due to climate change or sediment debris accumulation. Now there'll be more to come with that in future meetings. Next. So with that, I'll see if there's any questions before I dive into the second topic.
I do not see any questions, George.
Okay. Well, I know it's a lot to digest, so we'll just get into the next piece. All right. So as Frank and Rachel have both mentioned, our stormwater master plans have come to an end. We've invested a lot in the stormwater model side, and we continue to manage those. And now for those who are interested, we want to make sure that those are available to you if you are interested in them. And we'll talk about the steps to do that. So at a high level, you know, these different sub-watersheds are kind of highlighted in the graphic to the right, but we have a lot of these models currently an EPA swim / PC swim. Almost the entire subwatershed or stormwater service area is modeled in there. We do have a couple of models that are along the main stem of the Cuyahoga River and ACRAS. And then in the combined sewer area, we do have a couple of those managed in a different application called InfoWorks ICM. Next. As we now have a new contract for the stormwater model data management, it's really intended to keep these models up to date and extend them where needed. And so many of the reasons why we want to update these are due to new construction, or as we continue to do additional analysis, whether it's through advanced planning, design, or some of these local model extensions that occur on time to time. And as we introduce new standards, I kind of led with that first figure that showed how we're using 2D modeling in certain areas. So as we implement new standards, we want to make sure that these models reflect all of those new standards. Next. So how to request these stormwater master models as we continue to update these? Well, our group has put together a website. You kind of see there on the top. That website is for any of you, if you'd like to request a model, we ask to click on that particular link. And then we have some fields to fill out. You kind of see an example of what this looks like when you click onto that link, with some very easy fields for what your name is, the organization, email, how to get in touch with you. Next slide. If you do have questions as you fill this out, there's a little, kind of see that little arrow, you pull that out, and there's some more details on those specific questions that can help answer what it is that might help you figure out how to fill that out. Next. Eventually, when you're done filling out those questions, there's a little submit button to make sure that you, after you review those, submit that. Next. And then you'll get two different types of confirmation. The first one will be on the application itself, confirming that your request has been submitted. The next one then will be from an email that shows that your application was submitted. So whatever email address you did. And someone from our team does get back in touch with you quickly. I want to say within the next few days, you'll be contacted just to confirm a couple of questions. And then there will be a package that will be provided to you for you to download. Next. And that package will generally look like this as a zip file. We have a share file site where you'll be provided a link. And then you can click on that and download that file. And then by all means, use it as needed. We do encourage you, if you are going to make updates to the model itself, if you could please provide that back to us, because any extended detail into the local system or refinement, as we mentioned before, we're always looking to make sure that we get it right. If you can provide that back to us, that would be great, so we can review it and then incorporate that into our master model. Next. This is just a little dashboard on the terms of total number of model updates or requests that have happened to date. You can see there's been a whole range of different updates that have occurred, lots of different requests. And as we continue to track different projects to make sure we get some of the data back, we'll be using this type of dashboard to just get a sense of where the changes are occurring, so we can always make sure that these master models are up to date. Next. So with that, I'll take any questions on topic number 2.
Do not see any further questions, George.
Okay, well, with that in mind, I think it's got to be turned over to Kim Kolich, our design manager, to talk about stormwater design and construction.
All right, thank you very much, George. I always love hearing that presentation and understanding, all the numbers and the data. Certainly helps us in our design group. Certainly to some of the points George made will help us in, post-project results, right? To show the benefit of some of these projects that we are implementing. So sorry, Kim Kolich, Manager of Stormwater Design here at the Sewer District. I guess I'll introduce myself as well. And today I'm going to go through a few of our design projects and construction projects that we're currently working on. This kind of gives you an overview of all the projects that are currently either under design or construction. It is a list of 31 projects, so we are very busy right now in getting a lot of these projects from design into construction, especially. So just as you can see there on some of these dates on the projects, we have 5 projects already this year that have a construction notice to proceed date. So we are, like I said, moving lots of projects into construction, and lots more to come this year still to move those projects forward. So we're really excited to show these projects, get them complete, and use some of George's tools to show the benefits of some of these projects. I'll also note, just real quick, there is a link on the left side of this slide for our project story map. And if you're not familiar, please use that link and take a look. We have a GIS application that shows projects that we've completed, projects that are under construction, under design, and I think maybe even some future projects on there. So you can kind of get a good visual of where these projects are, what we're doing, and to get more information on them. So a few design projects to start here. The first one is the Chippewa Creek Flood Reduction Project near Echo Lane in the cities of Broadview Heights and North Royalton. Most of the project is in Broadview Heights, in the neighborhood in and around Echo Lane. The upstream part of the project is in the city of North Royalton. There is an existing detention basin on that upstream end in North Royalton that we are working to maintain and maximize its storage capacity. Overall, the project goals are like I said, improve the existing detention basin, replace some undersized culverts in the neighborhood to convey the water. And that water will be conveyed to a realigned and daylighted portions of the stream, as well as a new channel between some of the residential homes. Our consultant is Jacobs Engineering. Estimated construction cost right now is about $7.4 million. We just received the 60% design plans for this project, so it's moving forward quite nicely. And we're anticipating a construction NTP in early 2023. I think one of the great items on this project is the coordination with the communities. Both communities are contributing towards this project in different ways. The city of Broadview Heights specifically has contributed funds to both design local storm sewer improvements that are contributing to this drainage area, as well as the construction costs for those local system improvements. So instead of us just focusing on the regional challenges in this neighborhood, the city of Broadview Heights has come in to help make the project even better, to address all the issues that are going on. The next project we are currently working on in the city of Brecksville is a flood reduction project at Riverview Road. And this project, we are wrapping up the pre-design of this project right now. EMH&T has conducted the pre-design for this project to look at surface flooding that's happening at the bottom of these ravines, these tributaries that go to the Cuyahoga River and cross Riverview Road. We're looking to reduce upstream erosion, to reduce the sedimentation from happening at the downstream end, and really minimizing the long-term maintenance requirements of what's happening in this area. You can see the photo on the right showing flooding of Riverview Road. This flooding is happening because of a lot of the sedimentation in the area from the erosion upstream. And it's also happening because the age of the culverts and the elevation of the road. So this pre-design project is really looking at phasing of different projects to take advantage of the solutions throughout this drainage area to solve the flooding and the sedimentation on the downstream end. Right now, we just have a pre-design only authorized, but as we're reviewing those recommendations and talking to stakeholders like the city of Brecksville and the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, we'll be looking to figure out how to phase this project and how to implement it in the short term. And then we have a project in Bear Creek in the village of North Randall. I think Kelsey kind of discussed this one briefly from a maintenance project that they had done late last year. So for this project, we are looking at reducing the flooding and erosion risks of Bear Creek through this neighborhood. and replacing or daylighting the structurally deficient RSS assets, most notably crossings and culverted streams within this reach. We're finalizing construction now. I think we have our final easements. I'm sorry, we're finalizing design now. We just received signatures on our final easements necessary to implement this project. So we're looking at getting this project out to bid in the next couple of months and starting construction later this year. So a few stormwater construction projects that we'll go over. The first one is a stream stabilization and sewer protection in the city of North Royalton. This project is under construction right now, in progress, as the photo shows. This was an erosion on a tributary of the Rocky River, and there was a local sanitary sewer at risk and exposed within the stream channel because of the erosion. You can kind of see that on the before picture, that existing sanitary sewer, and that was a local sewer. So the city of North Royalton has contributed funds to this project to help protect their asset within the stream corridor, and we have stabilized this reach of streams so that we won't be seeing these utility assets be exposed in the future. The next project was kind of an interesting one. It's ongoing right now at different locations. Really, we are looking at updating, upgrading existing debris racks and access roads to those debris racks throughout our service area, so several different locations. The total contract amount is about $4 million, and this was an example of a debris rack here that you can see. Before wasn't really much of a debris rack, and we were having a lot of debris accumulation in that area. So now we have a solid debris rack there that is can be easily maintained and easily accessed through some better access roads. And then another project I wanted to mention that we just received a construction notice to proceed on was the Chippewa Creek Stream Stabilization in the city of Broadview Heights. This is just west of Broadview Road in the city of Broadview Heights, stabilizing almost 900 feet of stream, replacing a failing and undersized crossing on the upstream end of the project, and then also moving the stream away from a very tall gabion wall basket you can see at the bottom right photo, just to reduce the risk to that slope. This project is just over $1.5 million, and like I said, it's just begun. They're mobilizing on site, and we're really excited to see this project come to fruition. And I guess that was all of my design and construction projects. At this point, I'll turn it back over to Myron to wrap up.
Thank you, Kim. That was very well done. Thank you for an update on all the busy things that you're busy with. With that, any questions? I don't see any raised hands. Keith?
Nope, I do not see any.
So don't see anything in the chat. So we'll do for the folks who attended today's meeting, I will send out an email just to summarize the 3 or 4 links that we threw into the chat, just so you have it in one place. And again, the presentations are available on our website. This presentation will be available later on in the month. At the end of the month, probably, we usually upload all 4 the Watershed Advisory Committee meetings at the same time. So the next meeting will be on this coming Thursday, will be the Rocky River Watershed Advisory Committee meeting. And then next week we will have Cuyahoga River North and the Lake Erie Direct Trip Watershed Advisory Committee meetings. Still no questions in the chat. So with that, I would like to thank all our presenters and all the staff at the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer Districts for all the great work that you do. I really want to thank all the participants. We had 47 participants today in our meeting. Remember, this is a Watershed Advisory Committee, so we're always looking for feedback from our partners Please let us know any of your thoughts, any of your concerns. We are here to help you and work with you on the regional and the local systems wherever we can. So with that, I will end today's meeting. Thank you very much for your participation, and until we see you again in October, have a wonderful summer. Take care.